Welcome again to the Thoughts On series, where I give out my opinions on new Destiny content as it releases. This time, we're covering The Witch Queen and Season of the Risen, which both released on February 22nd, and is actually really fucking cool. Let's get into it. So, Witch Queen's story takes place a little bit after where Season of the Lost left off. Mars, the worst planet in the solar system, don't at me, has inexplicably returned, scarred with temporal anomalies littered across its planetary surface. Near its cradle, the Enclave is discovered, as well as a pyramid relic. As Ikora and the Hidden launch an investigation into it and the planet's return, the Cabal arrive to set up a base. At the same time, Savathun's ship, the Lure, appears, kickstarting the campaign. The campaign, as advertised, is about discovering how Savathun and many members of her Lucent brood stole the light. Along the way, we find a Pyramid Blade, a weapon that we further take to the Enclave to make the Glaive, a weapon based on an ancient memory. We investigate Savathun's throne world, her piece of the Ascendant Plane remade with the light, a crashed pyramid looming in the distance. Once there, we discover Deep Sight, a darkness-based ability that allows us to see what's hidden. We also find the Scorn, donning new colors. Oh, and Finch, a rogue hive ghost who tells us that their ghosts are willing volunteers. Finch, however, has had a change of heart. After fighting off Scorn and retrieving some relics, as well as visiting the European Pyramid along the way, we visit the Altar of Reflection, a place constructed by Savathun to essentially revisit old memories by abusing the Deep Sight mechanic. Upon retrieving our last relic, a fragment of the Crystal Prison from Lost, we find the truth, that Savathun was given the light upon her death at the end of the previous season. We also find out that Savathun has been watching us take these relics as we use Deep Sight to essentially give her her memories back, as her previous self made failsafes to make sure her risen self would remember. She also tells us her plan to trap the Traveler in her throne world, which would sever us from the light and leave us vulnerable to the encroaching pyramid fleet. Trying one last trick, Ikora takes one relic we haven't used, a worm found in a temple dedicated to Savathun's old self, Sathona, to see if there was anything we could use. Upon using the relic in the Enclave to peer into the worm's memory, she finds that a being known as the Witness deceived the Hive into accepting the Worm Pact and beginning a crusade against the Traveler. As the Traveler begins to get webbed up by a ritual ordered by Savathun, we set out to show her the truth and stop her from taking the Gardener away from the city. We fight our way up and show her the memory, but she doubles down and continues the fight. We kill her, but her ghost gets away. We secure the body and begin preparing for the Witness. After the fall of Savathun, the Scorn and Hive begin fighting for control over the throne world. As this continues, the pyramid stirs, as the reason it had crashed was because it had been cursed with light. Speaking of curses, Marasov visits us to get information out of Savathun's worm, so we do some things and find out that Savathun was there during the collapse, and deceived the Witness when it tried to kill the Traveler. This is one of the many reasons why we survived, though it wasn't for us. Questions still remain, such as, why did the Traveler choose Savathun? Or, what is the Witness? However, what is certain is that we need to prepare for their arrival and stop the second collapse. I mean, the next DLC is called Lightfall. I doubt we're going to stop it. It starts with an L for a reason. Speaking of the Witness, we get a reveal at the end of the campaign, and it's simultaneously something I did and didn't expect. I still don't really know how I feel about the greater implications of this campaign overall. I enjoyed the story, but my retroactive enjoyment thereof lies almost solely in the answer of why the Traveler chose Savathun. I think it's far too late to make the Traveler morally gray, and it's definitely far too late to make it evil. We've gotten enough lore to say that it's neither of these things, but people continue to argue with me on that point, so I guess it's not too late if you want to appeal to that notion. The Scorn stuff is interesting, and I hope it goes into a greater story about where Fickrell went and how his state relates to the state of the Scorn overall. It's odd to see the community reaction to the Lucent Brood. On the one hand, they're horrible. They still torture, they maim. What's even weirder is to see so many of these genuinely evil ghosts come out of the woodwork to support the hive and get mixed in with ghosts who are just tired of being without a partner. It's also interesting to see Lightbearer Hive who have doubts about their orders. Honestly, it makes me sad that Savathun ruined her risen self's chances for redemption, because the Hive don't have to be bad, but the old ways have shaped them so much. I'll be down if any Lightbearer wants to defect, but Savathun herself and the Lucent Brood as a whole are not ones to cross paths with. One thing I genuinely didn't like is how the revelation that Savathun was chosen kinda messes with all of the build-up to the idea that she figured out how to steal it. Not only because it should actually be possible, but it just makes things set up throughout the last year mean nothing. If these were experiments, fine, but we don't have any clarity on the matter, so it's just a bunch of meaningless plot threads. However, beyond all of that, as of now, I really enjoyed playing through this campaign. It felt like an actual story-driven experience, which is something I personally haven't felt much of through Destiny since Forsaken. And though I think I rank Forsaken's story higher, I think I enjoyed playing through Witch Queen much more. I played the campaign on normal, so alas, I don't have anything to say about Legendary with one exception. The Cabal engineers in the first mission are a completely different model than they are on normal, and I'm low-key upset. That being said, as I mentioned earlier, I really enjoyed playing through the campaign. I mean, we went out to the European Pyramid, and the throne world was cool. It was just all around a solid experience. I can see why they hyped up the campaign, because this feels like a campaign, rather than the more quest-like campaigns of Shadowkeep and Beyond Light. Furthermore, the glaive is the most fun thing I think they've ever added to Destiny, and Void 3.0 is really cool, though I'll admit that having a permanent ranged melee as a warlock is not really great. Permanent Oppressive Darkness, though, is amazing, and the things you can do with the subclasses now really make me excited for Arc and Solar 3.0. Back to glaives. While the exotics aren't necessarily worth it, the feel and intent of the weapon class is amazing. I pretty much always have one on because it's just really fun using it, which is something the game really needed in my opinion. It may not be the best weapon, but I don't care. Another thing that came out that just fills me with joy is the Parasite Exotic Grenade Launcher, which is the third worm-based gun in the franchise, this time using the worm as ammo. It's the funniest thing, and I love using it. There's just a lot of interesting weapons here. Weapon crafting is a little scuffed. I think the changes listed a few twabs ago would be good, but the system just needs a little more love. I also still have general problems with the economy that remain unchanged, such as the upgrade modules and the infusion system's unnecessarily complex design. One last note, whoever made Gambit shaders a rare drop, I need you to reverse it immediately. I got up to nearly 2 resets in Gambit, which I've never done in my entire D2 career. Got a memento for it, and out of the 5 shaders I was missing, I only got 2. I've gotten every current season Gambit drop a dozen times each, and have only gotten 2 shaders. To say I was livid when the memento dropped is an understatement, and I feel as if I've wasted my time. Moving on. The Altar of Reflection is an interesting activity. It's short and sweet, and gives interesting lore drops. I wish it was doable even after the powerful drop, as even without explicit rewards, it's just interesting. I don't really know how else to describe it. The setting looks cool and the lore is curious, if not confusing by nature. On the flip side, Wellspring is probably the worst thing I've ever had the misfortune of doing. While I think the boss fights are interesting, the experience of playing it feels like a slog, and I personally think I'd rather play Vex Offensive, which I've never thought I'd say unironically. Basically, if it's attack, I'm not playing it. Furthermore, trying to get red weapons for the quest was a painful experience. Because of that, I haven't jumped in to get the other exotic glaives. The strikes are Birthplace of the Vile and the Light Blade. The former is about venturing into a pyramid city in the Thorn World that acts as a factory for the worms, The latter is about Alakul, reborn as a Lightbearer, guarding the Temple of the Navigator, a temple dedicated to the late brother of Savathun, Oryx. Both of these are awesome, and the boss music in them, Harvest for Birthplace and Lightblade for You Know What, are just sick. Campaign replayability is a big plus, and the ability to unlock Master difficulty variants is really cool, even if I'll personally never play them. Having a weekly mission is fantastic, and the reward for this and every other Witch Queen activity is pretty cool. Lost sectors are interesting, but they do admittedly feel similar to those on the Moon and Europa, as well as the Cosmodrome. For those who aren't aware, I don't particularly enjoy Lost sectors where I'm forced to kill everything to progress. Luckily, Witch Queen's Lost sectors don't seem to work entirely on that principle. Entirely. Patrols are interesting, as 2 areas have Lucent Inquisitors, which have a little side quest tied to them. Lucent Executioners and Deep Sight chests also make the Throne World feel a lot more alive and interesting. Generally, I just think Witch Queen does a solid job on most of its fields. But I'm missing something. 2 things, actually. Let's get into them. Vow of the Disciple is a very cool raid. It doesn't have my favorite overall soundtrack, my favorite encounter, or my favorite mechanics, but it's still absolutely sick. That being said, the barge encounter at the beginning doesn't really match the quality of the rest of the raid. The only main encounter I really have a problem with is Exhibition, as it's a very challenging encounter if people don't know what they're doing, and it's much more difficult to keep track of than something like Acquisition or Caretaker. It's a between bosses encounter, essentially, which just tests the hell out of a team. Though I love Descent from Deepstone Crypt to death, that also falls into the same category. Rolk, the final boss, is awesome. Not only is the music an absolute banger and is probably my favorite raid track to date, but the mechanics are cool. Though my personal favorite thing about the encounter is the fact that Rolk takes an active role in fighting you. Most raid bosses will stand there and get shot at, while Rolk actively charges at you and tries to kill you while you kill him. It makes for a very fun encounter that I hope future bosses take inspiration from. One thing I've always wanted in Destiny were bosses that actually try to run at you and kill you rather than stand back and shoot. To build on Rolk, I just really like him as a character. All of his animations and attacks are things I want as emotes and finishers. His voice is cool, and his fight, as mentioned earlier, is fantastic. However, the best thing about him, in my opinion, is his story. Rolk has some insane lore dating back billions of years. He's beat up the Mother Worm, Zeta, used her as a power source for a super weapon known as the Upended. He's destroyed civilizations, including his own, and his crowning achievement relates to him annihilating his own planet with a figurative flip of a switch. There may also be an implication that he took Fickrol, and is ultimately the reason as to why the Scorn are now subservient to the darkness. However, that is pure speculation on my end. Speaking of, following Rolk's demise, the sunken pyramid begins to glow and Scorn begin to pour into the pyramid for an unknown reason. The activity known as Preservation basically takes you through the first areas of the raid with the intent of clearing out all Scorn. Afterwards, you can listen to Rolk's monologues about his life and what he's done. It's not exactly the most original activity, but I think it's neat. Overall, the sunken pyramid activities are just cool. New music has been added to the H.E.L.M that reflects the Cabal's story, with a tinge of Callus at the end. Synaptic spears line the walls, holograms of PsiOps battlefields replace the war table. Everything has this red hue to it. Oh, and the back door is now the Psiosorium, which is not what I would have called it. Anyway, I call it the Scion Gaming Room, and this is where one of Keidel's most trusted Scions looks at hive minds. Oh, and don't complete the story if you don't want to see the Psionic Gamer chair empty. Season of the Risen takes place in tandem with Witch Queen's story. The opening mission of the Witch Queen campaign had you interfering with Kaido's business in order to get onto the lure and find Savathun. Risen's story takes place in the aftermath of that friendly fire case, with Kaido wondering why the hell we fired on her troops. However, Zavala calms everything down by stating that they need to work together to kill the Lucent Brood, who now have the light. Kaido agrees, and so begins Operation Elbrus. Basically, one of Kaido's most trusted scions will scan the minds of powerful Hive Lightbearers to figure out not only how they got the light, but what their plans are, as they've been harvesting light from dead Guardians. We're joined by Lord Saladin and Crow, as the former acts as an emissary and the latter his protege. However, Crow has disagreements with the assignment, as he's kinda going through his emo phase because he just found out he was a monster in his past life. This culminates in Crow accidentally killing the Scion and Saladin preventing Kaido from killing him by basically offering his life to be among the Cabal, becoming Brockus Forge. However, we find out that he got promoted to Valis after he killed one that challenged him to a fight like a couple days later. What a Chad. Oh yeah, and the Lucent Brood were planning to move Savathun's throne world to the moon so they could launch an invasion of Earth. They're not good guys in disguise, they're still very much evil, so stop asking for alliances with Savathun. Take in the Rogue Lightbearer Hive instead. They need it. Risen is a very short story, being rivaled by Undying and Worthy in terms of actual length. However, it exceeds both of them by having an actually good story with a lot of character depth added to most of the characters in this season. Saladin is probably the best example of this, with his character getting more backstory behind his actions. He's quickly rising to become a favorite character. Crow, on the other hand, has kind of taken a dive. Now it's understandable, but it still feels like a bad case of not exactly knowing how the world works, which has basically been his character for a year now. He has sympathy for the Hive, which I'm surprised he still does after Savathun showed him everything the worst way possible. It's also funny how he wonders if the Scion brings the captured Hive pain, when Zavala, moments after he leaves, tells us that it doesn't. It's just weird, but hopefully the end of this season has Crow reflecting on what he needs to do to move on. Kaido and Zavala are fun. While the ceasefire plot was enough to fuel the fires of a fandom, the full alliance plot we have now has led to a plethora of interesting conversations between the two. Ignoring fandom fires, there was one really deep conversation showcasing the newfound trust between the two, as Kaido tells Zavala that if every Cabal dies fighting Xivu Arath in the pyramids, that he and the Guardians would bury them and carry their memory. Kaido continues to show that she's the best character added since Saint 14. Speaking of Kaido's characterization, there's something amiss within her forces, a dark shadow that pried some of her forces away during the events of Witch Queen's campaign. We'll discuss that in a bit. For now, let's move on to how the new seasonal activity fares. PsiOps Battlegrounds feel like a sequel activity to the original Battlegrounds in Chosen, which makes sense considering the context. Like the prior Battlegrounds, I'm overall mixed on them. Of the three added, I only find one wholly enjoyable, while the others are mixed. The EDZ Battlegrounds feels like the most fun, which is ironic because I dislike the EDZ. The Cosmodrome one feels the longest, with the tediously long second section and the barge encounter at the beginning. The mechanic of the latter is present all throughout Witch Queen and feels like a mix between standing on plates and an escort mission. It's not really that fun, but it's alright when it's just one public event every so often, and not the first encounter of a Battlegrounds you'll be replaying a lot. The Lunar Battlegrounds is very interesting. While I don't care much for the second encounter, the first and final encounters are very cool and have the addition of a friendly Cabal, which we need more of because that's awesome. All PsiOps Battlegrounds come with an altered version of patrol areas to match the Lucent aesthetic, the one that stands out most being the Lucent rendition of the Scarlet Keep. After tracking down the boss, Optus Scions come to escort you to the boss's mind, a place called the Mindscape. Fitting. If it looks familiar to veteran players, that's because it's the same space that the Nightmare Realm in the Callus encounter from the original Leviathan raid originated from. Our goal here is to kill a psychic manifestation of Savathun, which theoretically unveils their intentions or just makes it easier to do so. The Mindscape encounters can be a pain in the ass sometimes, but the look of the place more than makes up for it. I'd say, overall, that these are about the same as their chosen counterparts, and will fit right in if they stay in the Vanguard playlists after it's all over. Also, the Lucent renditions of the music are cool too. Vox Obscura is what I skipped over in the story segment, as, like the Vow of the Disciple raid and Preservation, I felt as if this deserved its own category. To start, the activity itself is actually rather cool, but I loathe the timer, especially on higher difficulties. The tank section is neat, the final area is a war zone, and revisiting an updated old landscape is always interesting, if just to see how it fares in the current story. As for the story, remember the Scion Conclave? The Scions who wished for species-wide supremacy and tried to assassinate Zavala? Yeah, they're back. However, despite everything we've been told about them, they're being helped by Callus, who has apparently survived his talk with a witness during the Presage incident. I don't know how I feel about this, especially since H.E.L.M makes an indirect reference to Otsa at some point during the season, mentioning Scions who felt their position was threatened by her freeing them during Chosen. Fun fact, Callus was planning to do the same thing, which led the freeborn Otsa to betray him, as she felt her position was threatened. Urix doesn't seem to fit this position, as the goal of the Flare Sisters from Dawn seemed to be a species-wide ploy to become the superiors. Hell, Urix doesn't even seem mad that the Scions were freed, but that the Flare Sisters' plans for supremacy didn't pull through. If Otsa is a part of the Conclave, surely they'd realize she's selfish, right? Not to mention, there's no way her or Callus would work with each other unless they were both playing 5D chess, as they both hate each other. Then there's Urix. If the Conclave is her doing, then why would she ally with the Darkness? She's a Scion. Surely she's smart enough to see that she'd die at the end, right? I just feel like the Conclave should have been a neutral faction rather than a dark force. For Callus it makes sense, but it doesn't for the Scions. There's also the prophecy at the end. Callus and Urix relaying messages through psionic broadcasts. There's one detailing the fall of the city, the Leviathan reborn, the Traveler corrupted, and Aramis revived. First sounds promising for Lightfall, the second for a final Callus raid, but I don't know how I feel about the others. Aramis was bound to come back, but I failed to recognize her as a threat. House Salvation itself was broken in a week's time, and Marasov, who has tons of plans, doesn't even see them as a viable enemy to be wary of. I just don't see Aramis coming back as some grand part in this cosmic war. If anything, she's a nuisance. Also, I'd rather see the Traveler dead than corrupted. One up the Red War. Don't detain or capture the God Ball, kill it. Overall, I'm cool with Vox Obscura as an activity, but like the Witch Queen campaign, I'm worried about its larger story implications. Guardian Games returns in its third year as probably its best iteration yet. Compared to the other two, that's not a lot, but it's something. For one thing, playlists have been added to give players a goal to strive for, rather than simply doing other activities. That part's still there, but the additions to this year finally gave Guardian Games a sort of balance that it sorely needed. Furthermore, the armor set and shaders are sick. My one complaint is the noticeable branding. I don't like the Hawkeye logo on my gloves. If there is a way to remove the Foundry and class branding, I think everything would be cool. I would suggest the Guardian Games logo be removable too, but I can live with it. Despite what I've said, I admittedly didn't play a lot of it. Guardian Games just isn't my style of activity. However, I'll say that this is a significant step up from the past years, and to keep going. Also bring back more Revelry stuff. I really liked that aesthetic. Oh, and more Tron gear. actual launch of The Witch Queen and Season of the Risen surprised me. I went into it with the paste bin in mind, and thought it'd easily be the worst story in the entire franchise after Warmind. However, whoever wrote the paste bin apparently wrote the story in one of the worst ways possible because it ended up actually being pretty good. I already expected the content to be mostly good, so I was prepared for that. While Season of the Risen isn't as good as Chosen or Arrivals, the story is short and sweet, and I think it knows it. Despite the gap left over, I think Risen was a decent short season. The only thing I'd add would be a seasonal story mission, hopefully one you could replay. Speaking of replayability, despite the Altar of Reflection bringing back old memories, The Witch Queen was a good step forward towards replayability, with a campaign that's finally replayable whenever I want, and a legendary mode that offers significant challenges, all culminating in a final boss that actually feels like a final boss. It's just really nice and refreshing. Of course, these releases do have issues on their own, but I feel like the good far outweighs the bad on a scale that I don't think I've seen in a while. Even with the shedding of unfinished plotlines, things like Wellspring, the campaign, story, gameplay, raid, and Battlegrounds make it worthwhile. For once, I can unequivocally say that a DLC post-Forsaken is worth it in price and in investment. However, the question now becomes whether or not they can keep that up. I have, as of the time I'm writing this, a lot of interest in Season 17, but next to no hype. I don't know what y'all are smoking, but there's nothing for me to grab onto. This secrecy is tiring. I get why they do it for Arrivals and Lost, but I don't really like it there either. If this is how seasonal marketing is going to be going forward, then this is going to get real tiring real quick. I'm already tired because Risen was so short. Not even a name? Come on, Bungie. Speaking of things that happened, remember when I did music stuff? Heh, yeah,